Last week in this series, we covered an important topic that needed to be discussed. This series about understanding Israel is important for many different reasons. We are over 2,000 years removed from the time when Messiah has walked this earth. The world has gone through many changes, new kingdoms, new empires, new religions, new political structures, new ways of learning, new technologies, new. There has been a lot of influences on these current ways of the world. Whether you want to admit it or not, it does not change the fact that the ways that we think and move today have been influenced. The challenge that we have is to pick through these influences and make sure that they are built around righteous foundations of truth. Or was it the enemy working to create his false kingdom? The history of this world is built only around two goals. It's not that superficial stuff about money, fame, or power. No, that's only about individuals. But the history of the world as a whole is all about moving towards two goals. It's about bringing about Yah's kingdom or Satan's kingdom. And when you look at the world in this most basic but crucial way, everything you see and learn about history makes a lot more sense and more perspective can be had. Now, the unfortunate but nevertheless still important point to understand is that because Satan is God of this world, our main influences have been trying to steer us towards his false kingdom. It is Satan's influence that we must comb through to make sure that as we strive for Yah's kingdom, we don't let the false influence of Satan mix in. Because you must remember, Satan deceives the whole world. So if we desire Yah, we have to be diligent to comb through those lies and break free from them. So listen, when I first started this series, I said, you know what, let me just play it back for you. Okay, so in subjects like this, it's always hard to know where to begin. Do you start with the truth or do you start with the lies? But the truth is that when we focus on the lies, we often can never get to the truth because the lies are in the abundance and there are so many of them. So what we'll do is cover the truth first, and then, Yah willing, we'll get to where the lies have come in place. And that's what I've been trying to do. I've been trying to cover the truth before we get to the lies. But the lies have such a stronghold on people that they want to jump ahead and focus on where the deception starts. And to be honest, my flesh wanted to jump straight to the lies this week and let all the naysayers really see what is influencing them. But that is not Yah's will. The truth must be covered for all the people that have a sincere desire to learn of Yah and understand him. So we are going to stay on task. When discussing and understanding Israel, the foundation that needed to be understood from these last two videos is that A, you cannot understand the God of the Hebrews without understanding the Hebrews. And B, Israel was chosen by Yah to be his priest of the world. They were required to be obedient followers of Yahuwah. And if they did this, they will be set up to be exalted by Yah over all men, so that the world could understand the ways of Yah's righteousness. But in the end, they rejected Yah and were severely chastised and cursed. Now, we obviously haven't got to that part yet in understanding Israel. But if you understand that the 10 tribes of Israel were removed and never came back to their land, and then the Jews murdered the Messiah sent to them, this should be common knowledge that they were in the end disobedient. I made the illustration of Deuteronomy chapter 28 to explain what Yah prophesied as the repercussions for this disobedience. And while many people did understand that, there were many other people that could only see skin color and did not allow Yah to lead their thoughts. Now, we're going to talk about race soon. I mean, we have to, because it's obviously a major stumbling block. But before that point, I do have a question for those that watched that video about the blessings and curses and saw skin color and or race, and you may have believed I was putting one race above another. My sincere question that I ask you to ask yourself is, putting my content aside for a second, when you look at the current occupants of Israel who call themselves Jews, are you still seeing the same agenda about race? Do you see race in their declaration of being Yah's chosen people? Because if you're being honest with yourself in answering that question, I'm sure their declaration of being a Jew is not racial to you. or seen as another race elevating themselves. But in regards to them, they are a race of people, aren't they? Why is the illustration I made and then asked you at the end to pray about, why for you is the first thought about skin color? Because I assure you there is much more to this than skin color. We just haven't got there yet. But this is a journey, and that illustration of that chapter was just to get minds thinking. And if the advice was taken, people would have just brought it to Yah in prayer. None of this is about skin color. But again, we're going to table that for now. I just wanted to ask that question. So continuing, the last part of the foundation we should have is C, that Yah is not done with Israel yet. In part 2 of Understanding Israel, which was about the culture of the Hebrews, I think one of the main points of that video got overlooked, which was about Hellenization. If you remember, Hellenization is the adoption of Greek culture, religion, language, and identity by non-Greeks. I wanted to clearly point out how important it was for people that believe and follow Yah to not be influenced by that influence of Hellenization. But maybe I did not communicate it as effective as I could have. As we move into understanding Yahusha, the Messiah, the first major challenge that we face in making sure we are not swayed by Satan is to make sure we are not moved or influenced by Hellenization. And the unfortunate truth is that many of us have been influenced by it. And so, as we learn about the Messiah sent to the Jews, as we understand him, it is important that we do not learn about him through the influence of Hellenization. And so, in part 2, this video was setting the foundation so that many understood that this was even a thing or a challenge. As we all know and understand our Messiah, we must remove the Hellenistic ways of Greece from our way of understanding the God of the Hebrews and his Son whom he sent. So we will now move into understanding Yahusha the Messiah from the mindset of the Hebrews, and we will remove the Hellenization from our ways of knowing him. When we last ended in the history of Israel, Judah returned back to their land, now called Judea, and because of their resistance to Hellenization, they had revolts with the Greeks. This occurred until the Romans took control of the known world, which of course included the land of Judea. And the Jews were awaiting their prophesied Messiah. They believed this coming Redeemer was going to be like King David, who brought peace to their land and brought back greatness to their kingdom. And now they were waiting. And that's where we left off. So in understanding Israel, let's now cover Yahusha and what he did for the world. Let's begin.
Here's how to use your home equity to eliminate credit card debt. No loans required with HomeTap. Most people, when they need a big chunk of money, immediately...
Let's begin. Okay, so that intro was long, I know, but this video will not be a full in-depth lesson on our Messiah. I have made many lessons on him. If you desire a full in-depth understanding of him, I recommend going back to the History of Religion series and watching those videos that lead you through his ministry. If you don't even understand why there was a Messiah, I made this video going over the prophecies that led up to him and prophesied of him coming. Watch that video. So the point I'm making is we will not go over Yahusha in the same way here. One thing that we all need to do when starting a relationship with Yah is really going over all the things we were taught about him and making sure they are biblically sound and not influenced by wolves. For instance, in regards to Israel, there are two mainstream views in the Christian church today. It's either that the current occupants of the land of Israel are the Jews, and they are fulfilling prophecy, or it's that Israel no longer matters and the church has replaced them in its importance, so there's no need to study or check for them. But as we read the scriptures for ourselves without that influence, we know for certain that that is just not true. Because Yah has said many different times that he is not done with Israel. But those mainstream influences have been so loud, it is a challenge to remove their influence from our understanding of the Most High and his coming kingdom. I say all that to say, when discussing Yahusha, this challenge gets even bigger. Because there are so many different wolves that enter into the picture trying to reframe and remold into what fits for Satan's kingdom, not Yah's. Every time you have seen a major nation or empire say that they are now a Christian nation, it's a time where you have seen a hijacking of the faith and falsehoods placed in that does not lead to salvation and redemption, but towards the coming of the Antichrist and the unfortunate reality of billions of people hearing the words from Yahusha, "I never knew you." It's because Satan cannot defeat Yahusha, so his only goal and weapon against humanity is to deceive you in thinking that you're following him, when in fact you are actually just following Satan. And so, like I've been saying since the beginning of this video, the challenge is to remove all these influences from our ways of following and worshiping our Creator. We remove these influences from trying to teach us about our Messiah and how we are to come to him. I mean, you could have been a Christian all your life, gone to church every Sunday for 60 or 70 years. You still need to drop all that and come back to him through truth and review those influences and reject any of those falsehoods you might have learned or attached to. And listen, I am not saying drop all these people and now follow me. Absolutely not. That's not what I'm saying. I'm on the journey, same as you. The relationship starts in the Word and in prayer. And as you pick up the Word and read it and have communication with them in prayer and sincerely desire to know him, you will gradually see shackles coming loose and truth that will set you free. Hallelujah. So as we understand Yahusha, let's understand him from the Word and not from religion. Because religion has told us that Yahusha, whom you refer to as Jesus in English, has basically freed us from the law, and all you need to do is believe in him and you will go to heaven. And that's the religion of Christianity. Then we celebrate his birthday, that's not in the Bible, by the way. We celebrate his resurrection, that can often be a full month away from Passover and 2 days from his death, rather than 3. I mean, Good Friday to Easter Sunday is 2 full days, not 3, but whatever. We have church attendance as a requirement of our faith, and a whole bunch of religion without relationship. And if you fall under this, you have a very high risk of hearing, "I never knew you." So let's know him today from understanding Israel, because that is who he was sent to. So if you want to know him, you have to know him based on the audience he spoke to. So let's understand him. The book of Matthew is a great gospel to read in order to understand Yahusha through the eyes of the Hebrews. Matthew wrote this gospel as a testimony to the Hebrews. He told the account of Yahusha that fulfilled the prophecies Israel had of Messiah. The audience was the Hebrews, so you can gather a great understanding of Yahusha as long as you understand the audience to whom he speaks to. Let's listen to Yahusha as he speaks to his disciples. "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? Is it then good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men? You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." That's Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 16. This right here is a call of action and an example of behavior that followers of Yahusha should be. Pure salt maintains its flavor, but in Israel, some salt was mixed with other ingredients, and then the salt would be no longer good for its original purpose, and then it was just used to put on pathways and streets. So he was commanding his followers to stay pure, which is what this teaching is trying to promote as well. Let's continue. "Do not think I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For surely I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law till all is fulfilled. Whoever therefore breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches men so shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say to you, that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven." That's Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 through 20. Okay, so let's just cover this because this is again a foundation of misunderstanding. Yahusha was explaining himself here because the Pharisees were making charges that he was nullifying the law. But what Yahusha came to do was fulfill the law. To fulfill means to fill out, expand, or complete. It does not mean to bring to an end. So Yahusha came to fulfill it, and he did. He obeyed it perfectly and taught its correct meaning, and he provides a way of salvation that meets all the requirements of the law. But there's some confusion in this because people have been taught to just abuse his words, then they walk in lawlessness and just claim faith in Yahusha without actually meaning it. But there is understanding that must be had here. So let's understand this a little deeper. What purpose then does the law serve? It was added because of the transgressions, till the seed should come to whom the promise was made. And it was appointed through angels by the hand of a mediator. Now, a mediator does not mediate for one only, but Elohim is one. Is the law then against the promises of Elohim? Certainly not. For if there had been a law given which could have given life, truly righteousness would have been by the law. But the scripture has confined all under sin, that the promise by faith in Yahusha the Messiah might be given to those who believe. But before faith came, we were kept under guard by the law, kept for the faith which would afterward be revealed. Therefore, the law was our tutor to bring us to Messiah, that we might be justified by faith. But after faith has come, we are no longer under a tutor. That's Galatians chapter 3, verses 19 through 25. What this is saying is that the purpose of the law of Moses that was given to Israel was not to justify mankind to Yah's eyes. The law was given because of sin. Without it, man would not know that they were going against Yah. The law clarifies the issue of sin until Yahusha, who is the seed of the promise, till he came. Now, when the scripture speaks on the promise was made to Abraham. The law itself was not the fulfillment to the promise of Abraham. So what was the promise made to Abraham? In Genesis chapter 12, verses 2 and 3, Yahuwah speaks to Abraham and says, I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. You see, Yah has promised that he would make Abraham a great nation, and that through Abraham all the families of the earth shall be blessed. This was the promise. And as we went through Israel's history, we waited for the seed of Abraham to come forth to fulfill the promise made. The law of Moses did not fulfill this promise. You see, the relationship between the law of Moses, which is the Torah, and faith in Yahusha is not a competition between the two. It is actually need and fulfillment. The law given to Israel showed the need for our redemption as it confined us in sin. And Yahusha is now the fulfillment of the promise from Yah to Abraham. And so now the just live by faith in Yahusha, who fulfilled the law and is now the fulfillment of the promise to Abraham. I really hope all that made sense. If not, please go back and review it again. Now, as we continue to read this, as Paul continues to explain this, for many, this is where confusion begins to set in. But before faith came, we were kept under guard by the law, kept for the faith which would afterward be revealed. Therefore, the law was our tutor to bring us to Messiah, that we might be justified by faith. But after faith has come, we are no longer under a tutor. That's Galatians chapter 3, verses 23 through 25. And from this, and a few other verses, the acceptance of lawlessness sets in. So I do want to clarify. In these verses, Paul is giving two different illustrations that explains the function of the law until Messiah came. In the first one, he explains that before Yahusha came, the law acted as a jail guard, confining people to understand what sin was and holding people bound in the rules dealing with it. This is what Israel was under, and again, why they are so important. It was always this way until Messiah was revealed. Now, Paul also illustrates that the law also served as a tutor. Now, in understanding this, please don't use the example of what we know a tutor to be today. In ancient culture, a tutor is someone who would accompany the children that it cared for, instructing and disciplining them when necessary. You see, the law of Moses was this tutor. It both corrected and instructed the Israelites in Yah's way until Messiah was revealed, and then we no longer needed the tutor. But if you do not understand the new covenant made with Israel, people just use this as an excuse for lawlessness. Behold, the days are coming, says Yahuwah, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant which they broke, though I was a husband to them, says Yahuwah. But this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says Yahuwah. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts, and I will be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. No more shall every man teach his neighbor, and every man his brother, saying, Know Yahuwah, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, says Yahuwah. For I will forgive their iniquity, and their sin I will remember no more. That's Jeremiah chapter 31, verses 31 through 34. So important. And so what we just read from Paul in Galatians is exact confirmation of this scripture. But when people ignore Israel, they're basically just saying, we're saved through faith in Messiah, and we're not under the law. We don't need it. But that is not the covenant, because his ways are still important to him. But in this new covenant, he will put his law in our minds and write it in our hearts. And he does this through the Holy Spirit, and through Yahusha, he provides forgiveness of sins. And so going back to what Yahusha said, whoever therefore breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches men so, shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whomever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. This is Matthew chapter 5, verse 19. He is still explaining that we should not be teaching people to break Yah's commands, but those who do his commands and teach them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. He did not come to destroy the law. He fulfilled it. He is fulfillment to the promise of Abraham. Being under the law does not bring about righteousness. Only faith in Yahusha does this. But we should not walk away from Yah's commands and walk in lawlessness. We now are led by his Spirit, who leads us and teaches us personally. We do not follow the law because we are saved by it. We follow it because it keeps us pure. It keeps us out of sin. It helps us to live set-apart lives. This is not living a works-based gospel. It is following the life of our Messiah and heeding the commands of our Creator. And because Yahusha fulfilled the law, he provided a way for all families of the earth to receive this redemption and be saved. The key to understanding Yahusha is going back to Abraham. Unfortunately, though, in the full understanding of Yahusha, people leave out two important groups. It is Abraham, Israel, Yahusha. This was the path to redemption, and you cannot understand this clearly leaving out one of these groups. The Christian church likes to leave out Israel, and therefore they have faith in Yahusha, but they still walk in lawlessness and rebellion because they do not know Israel. And Israelites often leave out Abraham, so they look at it as Israel to Yahusha, but then it does not allow them to understand that all who come to Yah through faith in Yahusha are able to be redeemed and saved. As Paul tells us, for you are all sons of Elohim through faith in Messiah Yahusha. For as many of you were baptized into Messiah, have put on Messiah, there is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Messiah Yahusha. And if you are Messiahs, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. That's Galatians chapter 3, verses 26 through 29. And therefore, during this time of the Gentiles, this is what holds, and it's beautiful. Through faith in Yahusha, believers from all the families of the earth are now heirs to the promise given to Abraham. Yahusha has redeemed all those who believe on him, whether Jew or Gentile. No matter nationality, your race, whether you are male or female, rich or poor, if you come to Yah through faith in Yahusha, you can receive Yah's mercy. And people can become heirs to the promise. And for this, every one of us should say aloud, Hallelujah. And that is the summary I wanted to focus on when focusing on Yahusha, because it is so important to really understand. Now let me speak on the challenges, because Yahusha also is the fulfillment of prophecy to bruise the head of the serpent, meaning he defeats Satan. And so Satan's only course of action to stop this is by adding confusion. He cannot stop the power of Yahusha, but he can add stumbling blocks, false teachers, hijackers claiming to be the ones carrying the covenant. He can do a lot to include himself as a deterrent for many to truly know Yahusha and be redeemed. Because if he steps in and adds confusion, or he adds these other man-made traditions, if he makes it a religion filled with religious activity, he can now step in between man and our faith in Yahusha. So for example, let me illustrate. So it's supposed to be us believing and following in Yahusha, who then brings us to Yahuwah. This is the path. But Satan has subtly added himself in this equation so that it is us, then him, which sometimes makes us feel that we have faith in Yahusha and therefore redeemed to Yahuwah. But in fact, it's deception. And the unfortunate reality is that we were really only holding hands with Satan, being led by him. And this is why so many people will hear, I never knew you. What we are doing now is removing Satan's influence and going back to the basics and coming to Yah in spirit and in truth. And as we draw out of Satan's lies to bring people into a real relationship with Yahusha, it may be uncomfortable, but I promise you that it will bring you more strength in your walk and power over the enemy. And that is for all to receive. This message is not something excluded only for Israel, and the focus of the series explaining about the importance of Israel is not to isolate one group and place them over another, but it is about explaining the will of the Most High and bringing about His kingdom. And there are just some parts to understand that need to be brought out into the light. Because just as much as you love Yah, you cannot hate Israel and feel you are right with Yah. He is not done with Israel. And as the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled, He still has prophecy to fulfill with Israel. And He still has judgment against those who harm Israel. So it's important to really get this right. Now, in speaking about Yahusha, I need to make this also very clear. Last week, I made a video about going over the blessings and the curses found in Deuteronomy chapter 28. This is an important foundation of understanding to have, understanding who the children of Israel are. But that chapter is far from the abundance of evidence that Yah willing we will be going over soon. But here's the deal though. For those with eyes to see and ears to hear, from the signs of those curses, we can easily discern that those that were under these curses are definitely those that were removed from Africa as slaves over the Atlantic, and then were dealt harshly in areas of the United States and the Caribbean. If you don't agree, it's fine. This is not the time to debate it. Wait till I get there with more evidence and information, Yah willing. There's a reason I'm bringing this up. The point that I'm trying to make is that this was all able to happen, and the oppression that is still over Israel today is all happening because the children of Israel are still cursed. These people rejected Yahuwah, and they rejected the Messiah He sent, and they murdered Him. And for centuries before they were taken as slaves, they tried to live by justification of the law only, and still in rejection of Yah. But listen, hallelujah, it does not have to be this way. I personally am no longer under these curses. I do not say this as coming from a place of pride, but from freedom. Israel can be removed from these curses when they come into true faith of Yahusha. True faith in Yahusha breaks the curses, and in the end times, as Yah brings His people back to the land, it will be under the premise of this understanding. All our kinfolk that have been going to church for years, but still are under oppression with no power, is because they are not under Messiah yet. And they are plagued by the same problem I tried to illustrate earlier, with people holding on to Satan while they believe that they are really with Messiah. These end-time events that we're all preparing and waiting for, they are all about Israel and their time of redemption. This will be their chance to come to belief in Messiah and receive salvation. And therefore, for all of us who claim to be a believer and follower in Yahusha, we must care for Israel and assist them in coming to Messiah and no longer living in rebellion and rejection. And so we need to identify them and then bring them to Messiah in truth without the lies and the falsehoods. And this is exactly where this ministry is going. Too many of you are looking at race. Too many of you are dealing with your own insecurities. None of those things matter. If you love Yah, then you should love his chosen people, and you should desire to help them come back to him. I'll tell you one thing about all this. This is exactly why we are now seeing the devil do such a pandering job to the black community. How Biden used them so horribly to get elected. How Black Lives Matter started to form. How the Democratic Party has such a hard embrace of them.
Clyburn, you brought me back.
While the Republican Party made sure they know that this party has nothing to do with them.
On behalf of all the MAGA patriots in America, I want to thank you for the historic victory for white life in the Supreme Court yesterday.
The devil is doing a roundup and making sure Yah's people are bound up in mental chains and that they serve the enemy and believe in the enemy. Even while they go to church every Sunday, masked up, solutions all in their arms. And when the tribulation period really starts, when the Antichrist comes, he will also do a great deal of racial pandering and moving towards racial equality. This is all to make a statement from Satan that Yah's chosen people choose Satan more than Yah. Make no mistake that prophecy will be fulfilled, and Israel will be drawn back to their land, and there will be redemption of Israel through faith in Messiah. And so as believers who are all about Yah's kingdom, after we work out our salvation, we need to make sure that we allow ourselves to be led by the Holy Spirit. And if he desires to use us to help bring Israel to Messiah, then we should be ready and willing servants. But woe to you all that believe you are a believer, but then are against the redemption of Israel and the promises he has made to them. So please be careful with your condemnation against this message about the importance of Israel and who they are. Do not speak through your flesh, but pray in the Spirit and allow his Spirit to guide you. And so there will be more on this later, Yah willing, but I wanted to make sure that this was clear. And Israel, if you understand that these curses are on our descendants, including us, your only way of coming out of them is true and pure faith in Yahusha. And this ministry is here to assist you with this. Now, I said a lot in this video, and as I think about summarizing it, the task seems difficult because there are so many different points. But I'm going to bring up some of the most important points to know in understanding Israel, part 3. Number 1, when discussing and understanding Israel, the foundation that needed to be understood from these last 2 videos is that A, you cannot understand the God of the Hebrews without understanding the Hebrews. B, Israel was chosen by Yah to be his priest of the world. They were required to be obedient followers of Yahuwah, and if they did this, they would be set up and exalted by Yah over all men, so that the world could understand the ways of Yah's righteousness. But in the end, they rejected Yah and were severely chastised and cursed. And C, Yah is not done with Israel yet. Number 2, Hellenization is the adoption of Greek culture, religion, language, and identity by non-Greeks. It is important for the people that believe and follow Yah to not be influenced by Hellenization. Number 3, as we learn about the Messiah sent to the Jews, as we understand him, it is important that we do not learn about him through the influence of Hellenization. Number 4, every time in history you have seen a major nation or empire say that they are now a Christian nation, it is a time that you have seen a hijacking of the faith and falsehoods placed in that does not lead to salvation and redemption, but towards the coming of the Antichrist and the unfortunate reality of billions of people hearing from Yahusha, "I never knew you." Number 5. You could have been a Christian all your life, gone to church every Sunday for 60 to 70 years. You still need to drop all that and come back to Him through truth and review those influences and some of the falsehoods you have learned or attached to. Number 6. The book of Matthew is a great gospel to read in order to understand Yahusha through the eyes of the Hebrews. Matthew wrote this gospel as a testimony to the Hebrews. He told the account of Yahusha that fulfilled the prophecies Israel had of Messiah. The audience was the Hebrews. Number 7. What Yahusha came to do was to fulfill the law. To fulfill means to fill out, expand, or complete. It does not mean to bring an end to. So Yahusha came to fulfill it, and He did. He obeyed it perfectly and taught its correct meaning, and He provides a way of salvation that meets all the requirements of the law. Number 8. The purpose of the law of Moses that was given to Israel was not to justify mankind to Yah's eyes. The law was given because of sin. Without it, man would not know they were going against Yah. The law clarifies the issue of sin until Yahusha, who is the seed of the promise, came. Number 9. The promise was made to Abraham. The law itself was not the fulfillment of the promise to Abraham. Number 10. Yahuwah promised He would make Abraham a great nation, and that through Abraham all the families of the earth shall be blessed. This was the promise. And as we went through Israel's history, we waited for the seed of Abraham to come forth to fulfill the promise made. The law of Moses did not fulfill this promise. Number 11. The relationship between the law of Moses, the Torah, and faith in Yahusha is not a competition between the two. The relationship is actually need and fulfillment. The law given to Israel showed the need for our redemption as it confined us in sin. And Yahusha is now the fulfillment of the promise from Yah to Abraham. So now the just live by faith in Yahusha, who fulfilled the law and is now the fulfillment of the promise to Abraham. Number 12. The law of Moses was a tutor for Israel. It both corrected and instructed the Israelites in Yah's way until Messiah was revealed and that we no longer needed the tutor. Number 13. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 19, Yahusha explained that we should not be teaching people to break Yah's commands. He said those who do His commands and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Number 14. He did not come to destroy the law. He fulfilled it. He is the fulfillment to the promise of Abraham. Being under the law does not bring about righteousness. Only faith in Yahusha does this. But we should not walk away from Yah's command and walk in lawlessness. We are to now be led by His Spirit, who leads us and teaches us personally. Number 15. We do not follow the law because we are saved by it. We follow it because it keeps us pure. It keeps us out of sin. It helps us live set-apart lives. This is not living a works-based gospel. It is following the life of our Messiah and heeding the commands of our Creator. Number 16. The key to understanding Yahusha is going back to Abraham. Unfortunately, in the full understanding of Yahusha, people leave out one of the three groups. It's supposed to be Abraham, Israel, Yahusha. This was the path to redemption, and you cannot understand this clearly leaving out one of these groups. Number 17. Through faith in Yahusha, believers from all the families of the earth are now heirs to the promise given to Abraham. Yahusha has redeemed all those who believe on Him, whether Jew or Gentile, no matter nationality, your race, whether you are male or female, rich or poor. If you come to Yah through faith in Yahusha, you can receive Yah's mercy. All people can become heirs to the promise. And we will leave it there. In these first three parts, we went over the importance of Israel. Then we went over the culture of the Hebrews, and now we just covered what Messiah was sent to do for us all. And hopefully, all that were confused by law versus grace now have a better understanding. We cannot and should not do what we want to do, but we are not justified by the law. We are justified by our faith in Yahusha. but we show our faith by our works. If you love Yah, we must do his will and keep his commands. We all must shake off the lies and falsehoods and seek Yah through his spirit and not through the rebellion that has been taught by Satan. Let us all attach ourselves to Yah through his truth. Let us all serve him in fullness. We must be servants. Let us do his will and help prepare his kingdom. We will continue on in this series and then understand what happened to Judah after they rejected the Messiah sent to them. This way we can have a better understanding on what happened with the Jews. But until that point, let us make sure we come to Yahuwah through Yahusha, and we do this with purity and sincerity, eliminating pride, coming in humility, looking for areas the enemy has been working against us, rebuking them, rejecting them, and removing them. Let us all submit to Yah and be redeemed. There are no curses for those in Messiah. So please repent, be forgiven, and be set free. Be blessed. Hallelujah. Praise Yah. Okay, thanks again for watching. If this has blessed you, please make sure to like it and share it with others. If you haven't done so already, please make sure you subscribe to this channel. Elohim willing, I upload every Friday. Please don't forget to follow this ministry on Facebook and Instagram, as well on this website, truthunedited.com. As always, I would like to give a special thank you to those who have donated to this ministry. Your contribution is a huge blessing to this ministry. Please, I ask, continue to pray for me and this ministry. I thank you for your obedience to Yah's call on your heart. I'm humbled by your support, and I'm very thankful for you. Okay. Thanks again, everyone, for watching. I love you all.
Searching for the best flower delivery in Roanoke? We've got you covered. Stunning floral arrangements from George's Flowers.
Last week, in Understanding Israel Part 3, we discussed the Messiah from the understanding of the Hebrews. In that part of the series, we stressed the importance of making sure that our knowledge of Messiah is not influenced or tainted by the influence of Hellenization. And I have made many points to explain how dangerous this influence can be to our faith. We have been learning about the Hebrews, because during the times when the scriptures were written, they are the only nation or group of people that were directly led by the Most High. They are called his chosen people because he chose this small group of people to represent himself to the rest of the world. The ways that he led them are crucial to understand, so that we are not deceived and led in other directions by those who say they are now the keepers of the covenant. So this series is highly important in making sure that the foundation of understanding our faith is based upon proper roots and branches. Now, as we analyze what's going on today, we can see that at some point the enemy will come against this truth as he uses his agents of controlled opposition to steer the conversation in the mainstream. I do not believe that what Kanye was mentioned for and suspended on social media for is a coincidence at all in regards to the direction that Yah is leading me. It seems that soon people like him will be used to paint a broad brush over this truth and make it so that certain things just cannot be said.
Professor Griff, who had been kicked out of Public Enemy back in 1989 for anti-Semitic comments. He and Nick retread anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and questioned the birthright of the Jewish people.
The Semitic people are black people.
Right. You can't be anti-Semitic when we are the Semitic people, when we are the same people that who they want to be. That's our birthright.
That's our birthright.
The reaction was swift and widespread. Rabbi Abraham Cooper condemned the commentary, saying anyone seeking a PhD in Jew hatred should watch this interview. Explanations and subsequent apologies fell short.
But they do not matter, and we should not give them more power than they deserve. What Father wills cannot be stopped or undone. So we will continue on through his power and not focus on the plots of the enemy. Last week, we discussed the Messiah and how he fulfilled the promise to Abraham. And everyone, for the most part, had a good understanding of how important our Messiah is. Now, As we continue to understand Israel, it is important to track their history and what happened with them from the time they crucified our Messiah until our current modern day history today. This history is something that seems to be hidden from the majority. But the thing is that the truth is not hidden. It's just that it's not told in the mainstream. Understand, after Messiah left, there was a hijacking of the faith. And the children of Judah, who again were no longer being led by Yah, they were now deemed by those who now took charge of the faith. And I'm not talking about the true church. I'm talking about the hijackers. Those hijackers felt that Judah was no longer important, especially compared to them. And therefore, the rest of Judah's story and their movements have been removed from our history. Until, of course, this present day, where a group has now come in and they have declared that they are the chosen people and that they are the covenant keepers, and they want to rebuild their temple. So for those who desire to live in truth, the next question in understanding must be, what happened between the time of Messiah's crucifixion and our modern current day history? These next few parts of the series is going to tackle this question head on. Let's begin. Okay, so when we last ended part 3, we were discussing Yahusha. In understanding what happens next with Israel, it's important to understand there was another split. There were those that followed Yahusha and started his church, being a part of his assembly, and there was those that rejected the Messiah, had him killed, and tried to resume life in Judah and Jerusalem all the same way that they had. Now, I will not be referencing the Jews that accepted Messiah and started his church. I do go over that in more depth in the History of Religion series. The problem with that history is that it takes us in another direction because there were, like I keep saying, hijackers that infiltrated and took control and steered the faith. As I've explained many times, what happened from that time to now is that Gentiles and foreigners hijacked the gospel and brought it to the world in a way that leaves out understanding from the nation who the belief had come through. And ever since the Romans came into the picture and declared that they were now the keepers of this covenant, what happened is that history has made it that the major empires of the world who have said that Christianity is now their main religion, they then took it upon themselves to show us what is important about the faith and what is not. And this has led to a complete disconnection from the truth, which we, the true assembly of Yahusha, are now reviving. The Romans, through the Roman Catholic Church, became the authority of the faith in the world, and the true believers were suppressed. And with the Roman Catholic Church having a massive amount of falsehoods, history then took off in a great scheme of deception and the pushing of false doctrines, all in the name of Jesus. This Messiah that was preached has nothing to do with the true Messiah of the Hebrews. And then we look at history since the Roman Catholic Church, and we see more deception and hijacking of the faith, from the Knights Templar, who claimed to be knights for Messiah, but actually satanic devil worshippers, where Freemasonry stems from, then through the period of the Renaissance, which was a period of mass deception in the world that literally changed history, and they whitewashed it, and they got rid of any true historic fact, and then they repainted and rebranded our faith, which is where we get Caesar Borgia to be Jesus. And this was the dominant image and reflection of the faith for centuries up to this day. Grandmasters of the Priory of Sion, like Leonardo da Vinci painting the Sistine Chapel and the image of what they want us to see God as. But that is not Yahuwah and has nothing to do with the Hebrews. This is just a spreading of falsehoods. And then we have the Holy Roman Empire conquering the world in the name of Jesus, making all nations submit to the church, bringing many nations into the belief of a tainted Messiah that has nothing to do with the true Messiah of the Hebrews. Then, as we continue through history, the Church of England gained dominance, and using their doctrine of ineffable name and replacing Yah's name with titles, knowledge of Yahuwah and his great name was severely suppressed. And while they reduced the world from knowing our Creator, they also at the same time financed the oppression of Yah's true chosen people, wiping their history from the world and replacing them with another. And lastly, now we get to the American church, who claim to be a Christian nation from the beginning, though they severely oppressed Yah's chosen people, and in the formation of the country, they were completely led by Freemasons. And that's just a brief summary of the history of the world. And when you put all of that together, at this current time, there is now a complete misrepresentation of the truth. And now we have many people all over the world that believe in a false, tainted, misguided way, or we have many people that see the hypocrisies, they see the lies, and they don't want any part of it. And through any of these two outcomes, Satan keeps gaining ground. So what we all need to understand is that time period, since the Romans took control of the faith, the true faith that came from the Hebrews, is now built upon mass deception. And all of that is just a discussion by itself. So what we will do is forget all of that for a second and focus on Judah and what happened with them. So we will continue on discussing Judah.
If you want to stop the hunger in the world, stop scrolling. Right now in North Gaza, children are...
We'll continue on discussing Judah. Okay, so it should be understood that the Jews had Yahusha killed. When the Jews brought Yahusha to be crucified, Pontius Pilate did not want to carry it through. But the Jews insisted. And what you will hear needs to be at the foundation of your understanding of what happened to the Jews. We will read from Matthew chapter 27, verses 22 through 26. Pilate said to them, "What then shall I do with Yahusha, who is called the Messiah?" They all said to him, "Let him be crucified." Then the governor said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they cried out all the more, saying, "Let him be crucified." When Pilate saw that he could not prevail at all, but rather that a tumult was rising, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, "I am innocent of the blood of this just person. You see to it." And all the people answered and said, "His blood be on us and on our children." Then he released Barabbas to them, and when he had scourged Yahusha, he delivered him to be crucified. You see, when they crucified him, they said Yahusha's blood is on them and on their children. They had his innocent blood shed and put it on themselves and on their children. So the death of the Messiah is fully claimed on them. And it should be a foundation of your understanding of what happens from here on out with Judah. If you ever go back to the curses in Deuteronomy chapter 28, please remember I illustrated this chapter in this video. If you have not watched it, please do so. But you can now know for certain, based on the Jews saying that they can put the blood of Messiah on their hands and on their children's, you can now know for certain that the children of Israel are under the curses and not the blessings. The children of Israel are all cursed, and that is real. They will not be the head, but the tail. And the only way out from these curses is Messiah. So after Messiah's resurrection and ascension, the Jews who believed in Messiah were being persecuted along with the Gentile believers. Now, it's important to distinguish. The Jews who rejected Yahusha did not face this persecution. There was a growing separation. The event that finalized this was the Jewish war that resulted in the destruction of the temple and the end of animal sacrifices. Flavius Josephus was a Roman Jewish historian who wrote the Jewish War. He shows how the prophecy of Yahusha came true, the prophecy about not one stone of the temple left standing. And this happened after the War of 70 AD. The events of 66 to 73 AD brought untold suffering to thousands of Jews. The temple and sacrificial system was ended. The Roman governor appointed over Judea in 64 AD was Gessius Florus. He was said to be a corrupt and cruel man. After he raided the treasury of the temple in Jerusalem, the resentment of the Jews was at a boiling point. The Pharisees joined forces with a rejuvenated zealot movement in organizing a revolt. Herod Agrippa II urged the Jews to be at peace, but he was rejected. He stayed loyal to Rome, not the Jews. A rebel Jew named Menahem led a band of men to capture the Roman military fortress at Masada, near the Dead Sea. Then, using the weapons from Masada, he went on to capture the Roman garrison in Jerusalem, next to the temple. Menahem was killed in 66 AD. The early success of the rebels caused a revolution fever to spread throughout Judea. Many expected a complete victory, as in the days of the Maccabean revolt, more than 2 centuries earlier, like I spoke about in part 2 of this series. Victory seemed to be guaranteed in November 66 AD, when the rebel Jews defeated a Roman legion sent from Syria. But this revolt was not led by the power of Yah. You must understand that. They were not covered and moved through the power of Yah. Rome proved to be more powerful than those revolting against it. The Emperor Nero sent his best general, Vespasian, with 3 legions from Rome to Judea. They arrived in Galilee in early 67 AD and began taking it down. Vespasian's forces began consolidating their gains and approached Jerusalem. The war was briefly interrupted by Nero's apparent suicide. You see, Nero was declared an enemy of the people and then was sentenced to be put to death, but he killed himself before this happened. There was then civil unrest in Rome after his death. Vespasian resumed his military offensive of Judea in June of 69 AD and took all of Judea except Jerusalem. He was proclaimed emperor, and he left Judea to go back and take control of the complete Roman Empire. This time period is known as the Year of the 4 Emperors. In the spring of 70 AD, Vespasian sent his son Titus to crush the Jews. Titus had several Roman legions at his disposal. His troops laid siege to Jerusalem in April. The Jews were able to endure 5 months. The last animal sacrifice was offered on the great altar of the temple on August 6th. The temple was burned on August 28th, 70 AD. The destruction of the entire city soon followed and was made into heaps of rubble by the end of September. It is reported that after the fires cooled, the Roman troops literally pried apart the stonework of the temple in order to retrieve the gold that had melted between the cracks. This was the fulfillment of Yahushua's prophecy in Matthew chapter 24. The Romans then proceeded to subdue the 3 remaining rebel fortresses. The last one was Masada, which fell in May of 73 AD, after its defenders committed mass suicide. The Romans ruled Judea with an iron fist, treating it as occupied hostile territory. After the loss of the temple, everything changed for the Jews. They had no way to properly worship Yahuwah. The Sadducees and the priesthood disappeared as factors in society. The Pharisees dominated the belief of the Jews, and a new Sanhedrin, which is an assembly of appointed rabbis, this was established, and they mainly functioned as an institution to study the scriptures. The synagogues continued to be the institution by which the religion of the Jews was sustained. Now understand, remember, these Jews rejected Yahusha. So for the Jews, there was no tolerance of what we label as the Christian movement any longer. The Jews were without a temple and rejecting the message of Yahusha. They had become a religion without its heart and soul. Many of the Jews fled south from the Roman Empire. They were no longer the stewards of Yah's kingdom. And that's important to understand. Emperor Vespasian issued an order that to ensure that no member of the royal house should be left among the Jews, all descendants of David should be ferreted out. And this resulted in a further widespread persecution of the Jews. He ordered the execution of all who were of David's line. Now, after the first Jewish revolt, that was not the complete end to the turbulence for the Hebrews, but it was a major turning point for them. You see, the Hebrews before that time were allowed by Rome to be their own sect of religion, and they were allowed to worship Yah without interference. After the first Jewish war, that all changed for them. They never again enjoyed the support they had from Rome. Because of this, there was consistent fighting and rebellion against Rome by the Hebrews. If you want to research this on your own, you can look for the Jewish wars during the time period of 66 AD to 136 AD. The Hebrew revolts developed into full-scale fighting, And in the year 132 AD, we have what is called the Second Jewish Revolt. Tinius Rufus was the Roman governor of Judea at that time. Jerusalem was still in ruins after the First Jewish Revolt that led to the destruction of the temple. Emperor Hadrian at that time wanted to rebuild Jerusalem as a Roman colony. He wanted to assimilate Jerusalem with Rome's already traditional pagan culture. So he dealt harshly with the Hebrews there. He placed many restrictions on their way of life, like banning circumcisions. This led to a revolt by the Hebrews led by Simon Bar Kokhba. They were crushed by the Romans, and Emperor Hadrian wiped the province of Judea off the Roman map, renaming it Syria Palestina. This is where we now get Palestine from. He renamed Jerusalem Aelia Capitolina after himself and rebuilt it as a typical Roman town. It would be this way until the 7th century when the Arabs conquered the city. Either way, the Hebrews were not even allowed in the city except for one day a year, Tisha B'Av, which is regarded as the saddest day in the Jewish calendar. Okay, so as we track the history of the Jews, this is where things get choppy, because they were no longer working through the power of Yah any longer, and Yah was no longer their source. They were their own source. They were a nation who had a culture of following Yah, and since they rejected the Messiah sent to them, they were not fully in his will. Their ways were more of a culture than a religion, very much how church today is more of a culture than a full belief. It could be compared to what we read in 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles, when Israel and Judah split, and then they had different kings that did evil in Yahuwah's sight. Only now, Yah served his initial purpose for Israel. He fulfilled his promise to Abraham, and through Yahusha, he gave a way to atone for their sins and be redeemed to him. Through his prophecy, we know that he is not done with Israel and Judah, but this time for them was not to come until the time of the Gentiles was fulfilled, which it looks like we are coming to that time today.
Avoid using these boring phrases. It's all right. That's interesting. That's absolutely amazing. I thought I had a really strong...
The time of the Gentiles was fulfilled, which it looks like we are coming to that time today. So, in tracking Judah, or the Jews, it all depends on the history that you follow and believe in. There is historic record, and then there's mainstream belief. But I will go through the historic account rather than the mainstream that everyone believes. But now this is on you and what you believe in. You must use your own discernment. Let's just look at a map. This is a map of the territory of the Roman Empire in the 1st and 2nd century. What you have to do is you have to decide whether you believe that when the Jews fled Judea after the revolt, that they headed north into more of the Roman Empire where the Romans were the strongest, or did they flee south into Arabia and back down through Egypt towards Ethiopia where they already had a relationship with the people there? You see, mainstream history wants us to believe that they went north through the Caucasus Mountains. But as we dig even more into history, we will see that this was not true for the majority. And from this historic account, we'll see that when people want to say that the Jews were not African, this part of the evidence will be the first part where people are able to understand why that claim of the Jews coming from Africa is actually correct. Looking at this map, where does your discernment tell you that the Jews would have fled to when they were fleeing Roman persecution? Now, like I said, there is much evidence of the direction that the Jews did flee. History shows that thousands of Jews migrated to Egypt and Arabia. The persecutions and restrictions imposed on the Jews were so great that a large number of Jews fled into Arabia. During the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries, what is now known as Judaism was politically powerful in Arabia. This power was predicated on trade. There were many Jew kings. We had Abu Kariba, Masruk Abraha, and most notably, Du Nuwas. The country of Yemen at one time was a stronghold of Jew kings. By the early part of the 6th century AD, Jew power in Yemen reached its heights. This was the time of the golden age of the Jews in Yemen, never to be achieved again. They were conducting international trade of commodities with the East and West. There were a number of Arab converts to Judaism that intermarried with the original Jews. Nuwas was one of these Arabs who converted to Judaism. He was the king of Yemen around 500 AD, like I said, the 6th century. The Jew sages, also known as scholars, were invited to teach Judaism to the people in Yemen at large. When Nuwas heard that the Jews were being persecuted in the Byzantine Empire, he retaliated by killing some Byzantine merchants and 20,000 Christians in Arabia. But this act brought about the fall of the Jew kingdom in Arabia. Again, this is very important to understand when you're understanding Israel. The power of Israel was not destined to be used in the world in this way. As it's prophesied to Zerubbabel in Zechariah chapter 4, verse 6, "Not by might, nor by power, but by my spirit, says Yahuwah of hosts." And so when the Jews tried to gain power by their own might, this did not have longevity for them. Now, the Jews throughout their history were completely against the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, not only did they reject Yahusha, but now this church, who was under the charge of Rome, who removed them from their own land, was speaking about a Hebrew savior with the Latin name Isis. So the Jews were completely against the Roman Catholic Church for the rest of their history in this world. Now, to understand more of the Jews' history, it takes us into the rise of Islam. You see, before the rise of Islam, in what we now know as the Middle East, there was a mixture of people in this land. There were the pagans who did not fall under the following of the Roman Church yet. There were the Christians from Rome. And like I just explained, there were the Jews who fled. History leaves this information out for multiple obvious reasons, but it's very important to understand the history of the Jews and their influence to Islam. At the time of the birth of Muhammad, the Roman Empire was divided into two parts: the Western Empire, with the capital at Rome, and the Byzantine Empire, with the capital at Constantinople. Many different influences weakened both of these empires by this time, which gave way for a new power. The Arabian Empire, with its new religion of Islam, established itself on the ruins of the Roman Empire in the Middle East, Africa, and the parts of Europe. Europe remained dormant and inactive during the period that we know as the Dark Ages, while the Muslim Empire grew in dominant influence. When Muhammad was born, many Arabs were still worshiping the sun, the stars, spirits, and idols. It's said that the Arabs possessed 360 idols, one for each day of the year. Muhammad was born 570 AD. I do go more in depth with the birth of Islam in part 64 of the History of Religion. I will not dwell on it in this video for time purposes. Muhammad, who spent many days in the hills outside of Mecca, wanted to lead his people away from their idolatry. He believed that he was commissioned by the angel Gabriel and believed he was a prophet. In the History of Religion series, the truth of this was exposed. But either way, he went out to the Holy Temple to preach to the multitudes with the words that started the first phase of the Islamic Revolution. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the prophet of Allah. I rebuke that in the name of Yahusha. Anyways, at that time, due to the Hebrews' influence in the region, the Torah was already being translated into Arabic, and the Arabs were delighted and pleased to read about their great ancestors and the story of the Hebrew patriarchs. We have been so trained to ignore that there was an influence of Jews during the early part of modern history. We speak so much of Rome and the Christians, but the Jews were also known. They just held pockets of power that were eventually overthrown. And because history depends on who is telling the story, if the devil didn't want you to know that the Jews still had influence after they left their land, unless you are seeking out this information yourself, the mainstream narrative will not cover this. But how and why do you see that Muslims are so attached with the Old Testament? Anyways, the Jews used their talents to form influence, but they were never able to become a nation again, even to this day. But like I just explained, the Arabs were influenced by the Jews there. The Jews read the Torah to them. Again, this brought great pride to the Arabs as it does today, like when they read things like Ishmael was to become a great nation. That's why it's so easy for Muslims to feel so comfortable with the Bible, and feel like the history is shared. If you ever speak with a Muslim, they are connected with you for much of the Old Testament. This is because they are in that history, and they were not taught about it through the Roman Church. You see, the church wanted to convert them, but the Jews started this influence because this is their story. This was their heritage. But let's not get caught up on that just yet. Let's get back to Muhammad. Muhammad masterminded the first stage of his revolution by undermining and discrediting already established beliefs and customs and questioning other political, social, and religious institutions. When he returned to the city of Mecca, the opposition intensified against him. A law was enacted that anybody who accepted Islam would be exiled. Leaders of Mecca conspired to assassinate him. This motivated him to flee from Mecca to Yathrib, later called Medina, the city of the Prophet. This flight is known as the Hijra. In Medina, Muhammad found the inhabitants there were more hospitable to him and his new religion. One factor that contributed to this was that there were many influential Jews in Yathrib, Medina, who were allies with other Arabs. And of course, these Jews introduced the conception of one God. You must understand that Arabs at that time before Muhammad's rise were somewhat tolerant of the Jews. The Arabs there were ready to accept Islam because they were influenced to a great extent by the concept of the one God of the Jews. Eventually, Muhammad was proclaimed ruler of the city of Yathrib, and in his honor, the name of Yathrib was changed to Medina. In the creation of Islam, Muhammad adopted many principles and law from the belief of the Jews. First and the biggest of all, the main idea of monotheism, the belief in one God that only Israel held. Muhammad also adopted the main details of the Jewish calendar, the Day of Atonement, the Sabbath, and many other parts of the Torah. Muhammad sought to even convert the Jews in Arabia to Islam, but this did not occur. So this transformed the high esteem that Muhammad held for the Jews to enmity. And instead of allies, he looked at them as competitors. He needed the confirmation of the influential Jews to validate his mission. And being that he did not receive it, he then turned against the Jews and became their tormentor. Muhammad tried to construct his religion as closely as he could to the belief of the Jews by accepting many of their laws and traditions, which is why, again, you find certain similarities. This is not just a coincidence or evidence of their God, but just because of the influence of the Jews. This is a big reason why this history is left out today. But either way, the rise of Islam was a dominant power in Arabia, and Muhammad was in control. And when the Jews refused to convert, he commanded his followers to stop turning to the holy city of Jerusalem in prayer, but rather to the city of Mecca. He changed the Jews' Day of Atonement and started the month of Ramadan. He changed the Sabbath from Saturday to Friday. To gain the loyalty of the pagan Arabs, just as Romans did with their pagans, Muhammad adopted many of their loved customs. The Kaaba stone was to receive high regard in their new religion. Also, the pagan temple at Mecca was to remain as a holy site. Thus, Islam spread amongst the Arab tribes. It is very important to understand that Muslims are not worshiping the same God of the Hebrews. The similarities in these beliefs come from the assimilation, just like the Roman Catholic Church did. There was a merging and copying of beliefs. History shows it was not authentic like as the Bible speaks of with the history of the Hebrews. You see, Yah spoke directly to the Hebrews. He commanded them, and he gave a lot of prophecy. And in the Bible, we see a lot of the history. No other belief is likened to this, though it is obviously continuously tried. This is able to happen due to ignorance and lack of knowledge and understanding. This happens when people look at the surface level without digging any deeper. They just look at names. Like in reference to Jesus. There are many references to Jesus in the Quran. Muslims honestly believe that Jesus of the Bible is the same as their Jesus, Isa, in the Quran, which is another reason why I use his Hebrew name and separate from the Hellenized influence, because it takes away from the confusion. Yes, in their holy book of the Quran, they speak many times about Jesus, but I have reviewed this information in depth in part 65 of the History of Religion series. I specifically break down the difference between the Jesus of the Bible versus the Jesus of the Quran. They are not speaking of the same Messiah that was sent to the Hebrews. They are just using the same name. But in understanding this all in full, you can see why there is so much confusion in the world, because it's not often spoken of how much influence the Hebrews had on the religion of Islam. And as we go into our modern history, with much of our past history taken and withheld from us, given to us in small doses mixed with confusion, it's easy to see how people will believe that all the religions and beliefs are the same, believing that they are all one. But this is just a direct consequence of a lack of understanding of history. Let's keep going. In the second stage of Muhammad's Islamic revolution, after all his means of persuasion to convert did not work, he sent a sword. He became a martial prophet, and the pagans and stubborn Jews became his victims. One instance, for example, was at the Battle of the Foss in the year 627. This is when the Jew tribes were defeated by the armies of Muhammad. 700 Jews were gathered in the marketplace and offered the alternative, the Quran or the sword. But the devout Jews were accustomed to martyrdom. They did not hesitate in their choice, and they were executed. This is just history, and if you research this for yourself, it can help confirm to you the direction the Jews took when leaving their land. After the death of Muhammad, there was a rapid spread of Islam in the area of what we now call the Middle East. The Jews fled this area and went south into what we now call Africa. Now, there is much more information that we can discuss that can be provided on all this. But to show some proof of this, let's look at this map of Africa made by Imam Bowen in the 17th century. First off, this area is called Negroland, which says a lot. But if we look at this map deeper, we can see where they took the slaves from. Right on the slave coast, which was labeled what? Yes, Kingdom of Judah. Understand, the Jews scattered and tried to keep their customs, but they were not living in their land, and they were not under the blessings, but the curses of the Most High. And they were betrayed by other inhabitants of the land that did not share the customs, and they were captured and then given to the slave traders. For me, I keep this map framed in my home because it's always a reminder that these people knew who they were taking when they captured and gathered their slaves. It was never random, like they want us to believe. This was all according to the curses of Deuteronomy chapter 28. People want to deny this because this information today has been so compounded with false information. But this is why this history has been kept and not made clear at all, even though we were given such long educations. But again, this information may be hard to swallow for those holding on to the world narrative of things. And Yah willing, there's much more to discuss. But I got a little ahead of myself when discussing that map. We can discuss more of this history, Yah willing, in the next part of the series. For now, let's summarize what we just learned in this video. Here are the most important points to know in understanding Israel, part 4. Number 1. In understanding what happens next with Israel, it's important to understand there was another split. There were those that followed Yahusha and started his church, being a part of his assembly. And there were those that rejected the Messiah, had him killed, and tried to resume life in Judah and Jerusalem all the same. Number 2. Gentiles and foreigners hijacked the gospel and brought it to the world in a way that left out the understanding from the nation who the belief has come through. Since the Romans came into picture, history has made it that the major empires of the world who have said that Christianity is now their main religion have decided to show us what is important about the faith and what is not. And this has led to a complete disconnection from the truth, which we, the true assembly of Yahusha, are now reviving. Number 3. When the Jews had Yahusha crucified, they said Yahusha's blood is on them and on their children. They had his innocent blood shed and put it on themselves and on their children. So the death of the Messiah is fully claimed on them. And it should be a foundation of our understanding of what happens to them from that point on. Number 4. After Messiah's resurrection and ascension, the Jews who believed in Messiah were being persecuted along with the Gentile believers. The Jews who rejected Yahusha did not face this persecution. There was a growing separation. Number 5. In the spring of 70 AD, Vespasian sent his son Titus to crush the Jews. Titus had several Roman legions at his disposal. His troops laid siege to Jerusalem in April. The Jews were able to endure 5 months, The last animal sacrifice was offered on the great altar of the temple on August 6th. The temple was burned on August 28th, 70 AD. The destruction of the entire city soon followed and was made into heaps of rubble by the end of September. This was fulfillment of Yahushua's prophecy in Matthew chapter 24. Number 6. The Romans ruled Judea with an iron fist, treating it as occupied hostile territory. After the loss of the temple, everything changed for the Jews. Number 7. The synagogues continued to be the institution by which the religion of the Jews was sustained. For the Jews, there was no tolerance of what we label as the Christian movement any longer. The Jews were without a temple, and after rejecting Yahushua, they had become a religion without its heart and soul. Many of the Jews fled south, away from the Roman Empire. They were no longer the stewards of Yah's kingdom. Number 8. Emperor Vespasian issued an order that to ensure that no member of the royal house should be left among the Jews, all descendants of David should be ferreted out, and this resulted in a further widespread persecution of the Jews. He ordered the execution of all who were of David's line. Number 9. After the First Jewish War, everything changed for the Jews. They never again enjoyed the support they had from Rome. Because of this, there was consistent fighting and rebellion against Rome by the Hebrews. Number 10. In the year 132 AD, we have what is called the Second Jewish Revolt. Emperor Hadrian wanted to rebuild Jerusalem as a Roman colony. He wanted to assimilate Jerusalem with Rome's already traditional pagan culture. He dealt harshly with the Hebrews there. He placed many restrictions on their way of life, like banning circumcisions. This led to a revolt by the Hebrews led by Simon Bar Kokhba. They were crushed by the Romans, and Emperor Hadrian wiped the province of Judea off the Roman map, renaming it Syria Palestina. He renamed Jerusalem Aelia Capitolina after himself, and rebuilt it as a typical Roman town. It would be this way until the 7th century when the Arabs conquered the city. Number 11. In tracking Judah or the Jews, it all depends on the history that you follow and believe. You have to decide whether you believe that when the Jews fled Judea after the revolt, they headed north into more of the Roman Empire, where the Romans were the strongest, or did they flee south into Arabia and back down through Egypt towards Ethiopia, where they already had a relationship with the people there? Number 12. In the creation of Islam, Muhammad adopted many principles and law from the belief of the Jews. First and the biggest of all, the main idea of monotheism, the belief in one God that only Israel held. Muhammad also adopted the main details of the Jewish calendar, the Day of Atonement, the Sabbath, and many other parts of the Torah. Muhammad sought to even convert the Jews in Arabia to Islam, but this did not occur. Number 13. When the Jews refused to convert, he commanded his followers to stop turning to the holy city of Jerusalem in prayer, but rather to the city of Mecca. He changed the Jews' Day of Atonement and started the month of Ramadan. He changed the Sabbath from Saturday to Friday. Number 14. It is very important to understand that Muslims are not worshiping the same God of the Hebrews. The similarities in these beliefs come from assimilation, just like the Roman Catholic Church did. There was a merging or copying of beliefs. It was not authentic, like as the Bible speaks of with the history of the Hebrews. Yah spoke directly to them and commanded them. He gave them prophecy, and the Bible gives a lot of history. No other belief is likened to this, though it is obviously continuously tried. Number 15. In the second stage of Muhammad's Islamic revolution, after all his means of persuasion to convert did not work, he sent a sword. He became a martial prophet, and the pagans and stubborn Jews became his victims. One instance, for example, was at the Battle of the Foss in the year 627. Number 16. After the death of Muhammad, there was a rapid spread of Islam in the area of what we now call the Middle East. The Jews fled this area and went south into what we now call Africa. And that is a recap on important historic understanding for you. Most people like to deny many truths today that are not popular. Today, at this time, where we live in an age where lies are able to be spread as unchallenged truth, it makes it much easier to live in the bubble that you prefer. But this is not living in truth. It's just comfortable ignorance or plain out accepting lies. History has been kept from us and taught to us in schools not in a way to keep us informed or to keep us empowered with knowledge, but to keep every one of us indoctrinated in their belief system and how they say the world really is and how our faith should interact with it. As we move towards the day of Yahuwah, we must hold on to the truth and live through it with every fiber of our being. As Proverbs chapter 12 verse 22 says, lying lips are an abomination to Yahuwah, but those who deal truthfully are his delight. And so we must deal truthfully and live in truth, because as Yahusha says in John chapter 8 verse 32, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. In these last days, we are actively preparing ourselves for our true King, and we must prepare ourselves as a bride with our lamps full of oil. There are so many different influences that want to steal your attention away right now, but we all must focus on our Messiah and his word, and we must shake off the shackles of lies and bondages we were born into and indoctrinated in. As we finished part 4 of the series, you have now understood the importance of Israel. You have understood what they did to Messiah, and now you also understand what happened to them after their grave sin. When you understand this history, the next part in understanding their identity in modern history makes more sense. These people are scattered all over the world, and Yah is not done with them yet. For all those who are part of Yahusha's assembly and living as a servant to him, it's imperative that in these last days you live in truth, because the enemy is about to grow much stronger and bolder in his lies. It is important that we all understand who we are as believers and walk in the power Yahusha has given us. As he told his disciples in Luke chapter 10, verse 19, behold, I give you the authority to trample on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you. Nevertheless, do not rejoice in this, that the spirits are subject to you, but rather rejoice because your names are written in heaven. That's Luke chapter 10, verses 19 through 20. And so it is up to you to walk in that power and stomp on the enemy whenever he comes at you. And if you're not living in the truth, the acceptance of lies will reduce your power and allow the enemy to come against you. Do not allow it. Be strong and war in the spirit and live in the truth. We are in the last days, and you must understand that your power is not in your hands or through your flesh, but it's through the spirit. This is a spiritual war that is now manifesting in the flesh. As believers, you must get serious and activate your faith. These are our days to redeem and be a part of biblical prophecy. Embrace it, and please fulfill the call Yah has on your life. Be blessed. Hallelujah. Praise Yah. Okay. Thanks again for watching. If this has blessed you, please make sure to like it and share it with others. If you haven't done so already, please make sure you subscribe to this channel. Yah willing, I upload every Friday. Don't forget to follow this ministry on Facebook and Instagram, as well as on this website, truthunedited.com. If for any reason you do not see this channel any longer, you can always find this ministry on my website, truthunedited.com. Make sure you subscribe to the email list to always stay connected. Please continue to pray for this ministry. Please know your prayers and support are sincerely appreciated. As always, I want to say thank you to those who have donated to this ministry. Your contribution is a huge blessing to this ministry and helps continue on with this assignment. Your support is a blessing, and I wouldn't be able to continue without you. I'm humbled by your support, and I'm very thankful for you. Thank you. Okay, thanks again everyone for watching. I love you all. If we are not black people, who are we? Okay, so you should be coming from part 5 of this series. These videos are a part of a docu-series and should be watched from the beginning in order if you're going to understand what is being presented. So please, if you have not watched parts 1 through 5, please stop this video and start back from video 1 and watch them consecutively for true context. Okay, well, like I've been saying through parts 1 through 5, we are not black people. But through these last 5 parts, we have not proved this. I was just laying the foundation to the answer. In the last 3 parts, we went through how the world was divided before race and skin color. And at the simplest dividing factor, we saw that the world is divided between 3 different people. The 3 sons of Noah, which are Ham, Japheth, and Shem. And we went through a lot of history about the peoples of this world. But we never actually got to where we, who are simply called black people, where do we fit into all of this? In this research, we saw that 2 out of the 3 sons of Noah have heritage that could be labeled as black people. But this is definitely not proving anything. There needs to be more understanding. And so before I simply go into stating who it is that we are, I think it is important to answer this question by doing some reverse engineering of history, basically backtracking our steps. So what I'm going to do is share some history with you that is not the mainstream history that they have taught you in the schools. And from this, it can bring more clarity on who it is that we are. So listen, first thing, I want to be clear, and I should have made this clear before. I am not only speaking to people in the United States, but like I also said in these videos, I'm not only talking to people classified as black people or darker skinned people, because not all of us share the same heritage. There are many of you in Africa that I'm talking to, yes, but your history is quite different. So in this video, I will not be reverse engineering that part of the history. For instance, I'm definitely speaking to the people in the parts of Nigeria and Ghana. Not all, but definitely some of you. And I absolutely am addressing those in South Africa, including the areas of Angola and the Congo, Namibia, parts of Tanzania and Kenya. You are all there scattered within. And just because I didn't call out your country, that does not mean I'm not speaking to you. You are all there scattered within. But I cannot address your history in this because the reverse engineering of your history is a little different from you than ours with the transatlantic slave trade. I will get to your history, just not in this segment. Either way, who I am addressing right now, specifically, are you who are the descendants of family who was taken in the transatlantic slave trade. Those of you who are in the United States, the Caribbean, and also South America. This includes you Jamaicans who were later taken to England when they opened up access to you in the 60s. I'm talking to those of you of the Windrush generation. All of you are who I am talking to. Those who are descendants of the transatlantic slave trade. Again, those in Africa and in Europe and Asia, I am talking to you as well. I just am not dealing with your specific history yet. I hope that makes sense. It is all of us who are labeled black people by the world while we don't know who we descend from. In America, they call us African Americans. In the Caribbean, we just go by the island that we come from. In South America, they call you Afro-Brazilians or Afro-Venezuelans or Afro-Colombians, etc. You know, for many of us in the United States, many don't actually know that the same troubles that we have had in the United States, you all face the same struggles in your country. The world system all calls us black people, but they also label us Afro whatever, which doesn't mean very much except that they say that we are taken from Africa. All of us within these 2 continents and islands that descend from slavery all descend from the same heritage, and we are from the same people. We are not black people. Now, to prove this to you, like I said, I'm going to be doing some reverse engineering of history. So let's get to it. So this is where we will start. We are in North and South America and the islands of the Caribbean. By the way, this does include Cuba. All of us should know that our ancestors did not originate here. What I'm saying is that wherever you are is not your land, and you do not have any rights or history with this land that you live in now. But over the time, throughout our generations, the governments and the system have worked to assimilate us in. So basically, after they enslaved our ancestors and then gave some fake type of freedom that was tied to cruel oppression that they labeled about our skin color, they then tried to assimilate us. The slave trade ended at different points in time, depending on where you were, but for the most part it ended in the 19th century. Around the year 1830, but again, it's different depending on where you were. I'm speaking specifically about the slave trade. That's the gathering of slaves from Africa and bringing them to these locations. Not the ending of forced-free labor, just to be clear. Anyways, I'm not going to discuss slavery, but just that this is the starting point of where we are going to reverse engineer this history from. So we see these locations right here: the United States, the Caribbean, and all areas of South America. All of us that were taken to these locations came in slave ships. So what we'll do is reverse history and go backwards in time and take these slave ships back to where they came from and started from. When we do this, we get to this area right here, the slave coast in the area of Guinea. Now, what I'm going to do is go back to information I introduced in part 1, but I promised that I would get to. In part 1, I mentioned the slave maps. So now in our reverse engineering of history, it's time that we can go back to them. So understand, please, that this is not an easy subject to break down. If it was, you would have heard all of this before. But I'm going to do my best to make a difficult subject easier to digest. I'm going to start here. Here are 3 maps. They are all maps from the 18th century. This one is from 1747, charted by Amon Bowen. This is a full map, and this one is more zoomed in on the area that I will focus on. Amon Bowen was a royal map maker to both King George II of Great Britain and Louis XV of France. His maps are in English, which for us, it helps greatly. Then there is this map from 1737 from Johann Matthias Hase. He was a German mathematician, astronomer, and cartographer. A cartographer means a professional who makes maps to communicate spatial information. He's a map maker. This is his map. And then we have this map from 1710 from Hermann Moll. He was a German-born English map maker known for a number of influential maps. So we have these 3 maps right here. These are 3 slave maps from the 18th century documented in Africa. One from 1747, one from 1737, and another from 1710. Now, I have placed these maps on my website for everyone to be able to have access to them and download them for yourself. If you're subscribed to my website, you should have received an email. For anyone else, the link is in the description box. These maps are an important part of understanding our history that was taken from us, so I encourage you to review them on your own. What I first want to do is highlight this region right here. This section along the coast is called Guinea. It is on all 3 maps. On Hermann Moll's map, above Guinea, he writes this: I am credibly informed that ye country about 100 leagues north of the coast of Guinea is inhabited by white men, or at least a different kind of people from the blacks, who wear clothes and have ye use of letters, made silk, and that some of them keep the Christian Sabbath. So what he's saying is that this area of Guinea is colonized land of the Europeans, and it is still to this day. It is not controlled by the African people, but by the colonizers. This area of Guinea is conquered land of Africa that was used for trade. If you notice, it's broken down by what was traded. There was the grain coast, the ivory coast, which we still know it as today. There's the gold coast, and then the slave coast. You can understand by their names what was traded in those regions. Now, there is an interesting point about the slave coast, but I will try to get back to it later. Just note that the slave coast is one point where the slaves were put into ships to send to the Americas and the Caribbean. What I'm explaining first is that this area is conquered territory. That's what I want you to get. I will not go over the history of Guinea in this video, but just know that the European colonizers began to trade and make arrangements and deals with the Hamites of Africa. They knew the difference, and they did not come to Africa for them. If you ever watch movies like The Woman King, you see that the African king made deals with the European colonizers, which they traded slaves for silk and other fine goods. This is just an accurate depiction of history. What I'm saying is that the European colonizers knew the difference of who they were looking for, and they did not come to Africa for the Hamites. I have this book called The Slave Trade by Hugh Thomas. It's a very extensive, well-documented book. On page 45, he writes this: the racial mixture in West Africa was interesting. Before the Arab invasions, the land was principally inhabited by 2 peoples. In the northwest, the Hamites, called Libyans or Barbary by the Romans, or Berbers by the Arabs, a word actually deriving from Barbary, and black people to the south of the desert. All the same, the Berbers retained most of their individual characteristics. As highland tillers of the soil and lovers of freedom, they were rarely moved by religious enthusiasm and were able, on the whole, to preserve their purity of race. But in the south, there was much mixture. Thus, the people of Timbuktu had black skin but much Berber blood. They thought of the black Songhai in the middle Niger Valley as savages. Remember that point. I highlight this excerpt to show that this information goes back to what I presented in parts 3 through 5. Understand, the world was not originally separated by skin color, but by tribes, and this was how the world was viewed. The Hamites had known regions. They were known in the northwest and the east. They were known as Libyans. These were the sons of Put. Then in the northeast, we already know Mizraim in Egypt. And then south, we have the people of Cush in Ethiopia. This land was all accounted for. This was the land given to them. If you look at these slave maps, it confirms this. But this land west, that's south of the Sahara, was land that was originally for Canaan. But Canaan did not take his land, but he occupied Israel's. And therefore, as they warned him, his people were displaced. Now, you see that upper part of Africa, it shows the Barbary, the barbarians as the Greeks called them. Then you see Ethiopia. You see, the slavers, they knew the difference in the people and the lands that they occupied. These were their slave maps. But there was a territory that they knew of, and this is what we will focus on now.
This is a customizable leather toiletry bag that you need to check out. You can fit so much inside, like.
But there was a territory that they knew of, and this is what we will focus on now. If you remember in part 1, I said I would much rather be called a Negro. I said that because with just a little research, we are able to go back and gain understanding of who we are. In these slave maps, there is a part of these maps that validate this statement. It's this land right here. It's called Negro land. They took the Negroes from Negro land. This land right here. It is in West Africa in the sub-Saharan region. So as we reverse engineer history, let's understand it clearly. We started here in the Americas and the Caribbean. And then going backwards, we head to Guinea, where the slaves were put on ships at the slave coast, which was right here. Now, if we keep going backwards in time, understanding these maps, the slaves, they were not taken from Guinea. This was the place of trade. This is where the Europeans set up their shop. This was their area. They noted it in their maps. So with that understanding, where do you think they got their Negro slaves from? Yeah, Negro land. The place of the people they call black people. Negro means black. This is where they got their black people. So, as we have reversed history, we are now in this area of Negro land that inhabited the people that were taken as slaves. Now, here's the interesting point of history, and this will show you how ineffective our education system really is. This land is not actually called Negro land. This is what the European slavers called it, but that's not actual history. This place and area does have a name, and it was known. It's just that the European slavers did not care. And if it were taught in our schools, it would be able to help answer questions instead of leaving us in the dark. Don't think that your schools and all this education didn't know. They just didn't tell us. And that part is personal to me because I graduated from an HBCU, Hampton University to be exact. And though I do brag and do believe that it is the best of all the HBCUs, I would not send my child there. It did not teach a thing about any of this. If we went to schools that were actually created for us, and they don't even teach us this history, it is clear that our education was not meant to liberate us with knowledge, but to enslave us more with indoctrination. But that's another point for another day. My point is that you will not find this history taught in schools, and it absolutely should be, at least showing us the European slave maps. The next part of history I'm about to go into brings about a great deal of answers. So let's take this area of what they call Negro land and see what it was before the colonizers rounded up their slaves from it. Now please note, I do go into greater detail of this information in my video series about understanding Israel if you ever want to do a deeper dive into this with all my sources. But in making this as simple as possible, I'm only hovering over this information. just so you know. If you want to watch the video, the link is in the description box. Anyways, this area that was called Negroland, it's called the Songhai Empire. The Songhai people themselves were farmers, fishermen, hunters, craftsmen, traders, and warriors. They were a confederation of people who came to dominate the middle Niger around the region of Dendi. This area right here is the area of the Songhai Empire before it was taken down. The territory of the land that the slavers labeled Negroland was the territory and land of the Songhai Empire. Write it down, Songhai Empire. The Songhai Empire was an empire that dominated the Western Sudan in the 15th and 16th century. It replaced Mali as the most important empire in West Africa. This was after the time of the decline of Mansa Musa's empire of Mali in the year 1350 AD. The Songhai Empire began with Soni Ali I. So let's get a quick summary here. Let's understand one thing very clearly from this point right now. The people that were taken in the transatlantic slave trade, you are not black people. At the most basic level, you are Negroes that were taken from what the slavers labeled Negroland. But this land was actually the Songhai Empire. So right now, you can say you are from the Songhai people. So you do have an identity, and it's not just black people. But we will go further. So when you review this people of the Songhai, the Hamites of Africa, they absolutely rejected this people. They called them savages, as I just read from that quote earlier from Hugh Thomas's book, The Slave Trade. So you know how they say that our own people sold us into slavery? That is not true. That is only looking at it from a perspective of skin color. It is actually the case that Hamites who did not like the people of Songhai, who believed that they were savages and they were different people than they worked with the Europeans and sold us into slavery. It is actually the case that the Europeans made agreements with the Hamites to infiltrate the Songhai people. Soni Ali Bur, leader of the Songhai people, realized the importance of the Niger River for commerce and military operations. Like the Mali Empire before him, he divided his empire into provinces and placed each under the control of a governor. This was in the late 15th century. During this time, the people of Songhai were beginning to meet new visitors. People like Prince Henry the Navigator. He sent Portuguese ships and sailors down the west coast of Africa, establishing a number of coastal trading points. I mean, write these names down yourself so you can study them on your own. Prince Henry the Navigator and Soni Ali. Okay, so understand that these European explorers, they tried to get the Songhai people before they even used the Hamites. European explorers and traders seeking to get into the Sudan from the coastal regions found their way barred by rainforest and the mighty Songhai armed forces. There were raids to get slaves from the Songhai Empire. They were repulsed time and again during this early period of the Songhai rule. So this obviously brought about distrust from the Songhai people against all Europeans. The Europeans could not crack their defenses through the 15th and 16th centuries. They were attacked by Hamite converts to Islam, and by the end of the 16th century, they lost their control and were overtaken, and the people en masse were taken down the slave coast in chains on their way to the Americas. So let's keep going with this reversal of history, because the Songhai Empire is an empire of the semi-modern world that took place during the periods of the Renaissance. But there is much more to this history. In order to explain this, I'm going to target and pinpoint one specific area. This area right here. This area or settlement called Kukya, also known as Gao, please forgive me if I'm not pronouncing it correctly. This place is highly important to understand. This was the first large settlement of the Songhai people. This place was situated in the Dendi country and known as Dendina, lying near the Niger River on the northwestern border of what is now the modern state of Nigeria. And so if we reverse engineer history with this point of Kukya as our point of reference, we can begin to gain more clarity of who the Songhai people were. Again, Kukya is also known as Gao. It is the same place. So if you remember, I said that the Songhai Empire came after the Empire of Mali. Okay, so we will continue back through time to this people of Mali. The Empire of Mali started around the early 13th century. I think it's the year 1226 to its decline in the 15th century when the Songhai took over. Just keeping it simple, this area of Gao was taken by Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa was a powerful king of the Mali Empire. He extended the Mali Empire from east to west. In 1326 AD, he made a pilgrimage to Mecca, the holy city of the Mohammedans. He was a Muslim. On his pilgrimage, his general of Mali took control of Gao. Now, it is important to understand this because the same people that they conquered to take down this town of Gao were the same people that later reclaimed it and formed the Songhai Empire. I hope I'm not losing you, so just follow me. I'm just moving down through time, starting from the Songhai Empire down to the Empire of Mali. We descend from those people of the Songhai, those who took back our land from the Mali Empire. But when Mali took over, who did they take the land from? This is where we begin to receive clarity of who we are. But before we get into it, let's just summarize where we are in this reversal of history. Remember, we started at the transatlantic slave trade. Now, going back in time, before the slave trade, the people that were taken came from the Songhai Empire, which the slavers labeled Negro land. The Songhai Empire became dominant in the 15th century after the fall of the Mali Empire. The people of Songhai took back their land from the Mali Empire. The Mali Empire was before the Songhai Empire and started in the 13th century. What we want to learn is who were the people that the Mali Empire conquered when taking the land of Gao. Who was there before the people of Mali took it as their territory? That's where we're going right now in this reversal of history. So what we're going to understand right now is who the people were who Mali conquered. I want to make sure that's clear.
Get your floors sparkling clean with our mop and bucket set. This household cleaning tool is perfect for any surface.
He conquered. I want to make sure that's clear. When Mansa Musa returned from his pilgrimage to Arabia by way of Gao, he accepted the surrender from the king of Ghana and his nobles. Among these prisoners were Ali Kolon, or Kolon, and his brother Selmar Nar, the sons of Za Yasebi. So here's the answer of who controlled the land before Mansa Musa. Those who controlled the settlement of Gao before Mansa Musa took control were those of the Za dynasty. Write it down, Za dynasty. And it was this same people from that Za dynasty that Soni Ali, the one who started the Songhai Empire, it is this same people that they descend from. So if you're following, those in the transatlantic slave trade descend from the Songhai Empire, who are just descendants of the Za dynasty who later reclaimed their land back from Mali. The Songhai Empire is often referred to as the Za Soni dynasty after Soni Ali. So, who are the people of the Za dynasty? And this is where it gets really interesting. This right here takes us back many centuries to the 4th century AD. This man that I'm illustrating is Za el-Yemeni. He came to Kukya, what we also call Gao. He came around 300 AD, around that time. He established a line of kings known as the Za, or Dia dynasty. The Za dynasty. He was the founder of the first Sudanic dynasty in Western Africa. This man was a Yahudim, the actual Hebrew word for Jew. Za el-Yemeni was a Hebrew. His name is sometimes written as Za al-Ayaman. Za el-Yemeni came to the Niger country by way of Rogla in central Algeria today, written like this, Orgla. Orgla was a great trading center of the Yahudim. In Dr. Alan Godbee's book, The Lost Tribes, a Myth, in his book he writes, the founder of the first Yahudim dynasty established his capital later at Gao, on the eastern upper Niger River. Nahum Schloutz, author of Travels in North Africa, he writes, the Arabs, Moors, and the Sudanic writers attribute to the ancient black African Hebrews the establishment of the first empires. It says, the erection of the first public buildings in the country, the construction of the first canals and irrigation systems, and the institution of a social economic regime which still survives in all Saharan communities. So let me go over something. After the fall of Jerusalem, the Hebrews migrated and scattered all around the world. We know of their history in Europe, which I will tie in later. We know about their travels throughout Asia, but they also scattered in Africa and established themselves outside of the land of Cush, Mizraim, and Put. All of this area right here was not their land. They had no rights to it. This land of Canaan, that Canaan forfeited, this land of West Africa, they migrated into. The Yahudim came into the Western Sudan from northern and eastern Africa as a result of a series of migrations due to persecution. Please note that the word Yahudim is the actual word for Jew. These Yahudim migrated. They adopted new methods from other people and left their material, educational, and moral imprint among the people with whom they resided. For instance, as an example, in America, we, who they call black people, even in an oppressed land, though we have adopted many of their methods, we still have an imprint on their culture, and that's from a people who had no identity. These people who were migrating knew who they were. For many centuries, these Hebrews had to use great physical and psychological initiative. They could not afford to be complacent or show no concern about their surroundings and where they were. They were hated, so if they got too comfortable or complacent, that could mean cultural stagnation or death. The Yahudim imported into the western part of Africa a superior material, educational, and moral culture soon after 300 AD. And this cultural advancement was not duplicated or exceeded until the ascendancy of the Mohammedan leader Mansa Kanka Musa of Mali in 1312 AD. The Yahudim had an advantage over the African tribes. They carried their culture, their history, their laws, and written records with them. This assured them a constant precedent for the development of a higher social organization. Because of the stability of their Hebrew culture, the Yahudim were not absorbed into the indigenous population. They had rules, they had laws, they had a Torah. They made use of every opportunity. They were an industrious and skillful people. From the Yahudim Ghanaian states were found kings, princes, governors, generals, secretaries, treasurers, revenue agents, judges, architects, engineers, doctors, historians, etc. They set up shop there. And when they migrated, we know they formed the Za dynasty. In his book, on his map on page 256, Professor Godby says that 22 Hebrew kings reigned in Ghana before the Hegira in 622 AD, and 44 had reigned by 790. It is said that all the kings of Ghana were called by the title Kayamaga, which is said to mean King of Gold. Kumbi was the ancient capital of Ghana. It was located in the southern part of the present country of Mali. During the Middle Ages, understand, the name Ghana was not used to designate this country that we know today. Ghana was just the title of its kings. Ghana means strong warrior king, and was the title accorded to the kings of the medieval Ghana Empire in West Africa. This empire was a Hebrew empire, the Hebrew Empire of Ghana kings. The foundation of the Ghanaian Empire was based on the affluence of gold and iron. The use of iron in Africa, especially Ghana, revolutionized the social and military systems. Ghanaians fought many wars against their neighbors who did not use iron, but fought with bars of ebony. The Ghanaians could destroy their enemies because they fought with lances and swords. The king's revenue agents levied taxes on imports and exports, and the medium of exchange was gold. This was the Za dynasty, and it held sway in West Africa for over 1,000 years. Understand, all the kings of Ghana professed the Hebrew religion. But in the year 1009, a radical transformation occurred. Za Kasi accepted Islam. In his book, Africa, History of a Continent, when concerning Islam, Basil Davidson makes the point. Islam reached the markets of the Western Sudan by at least the 9th century, but it makes little initial impact. The rulers of Ghana do not accept Islam as one of their state religions. Only at the beginning of the 11th century are there a few such conversions. The earliest of any importance of which we know being that of the King of Gao, traditionally in 1010, followed by that of the King of Kanem-Bornu in 1086. Davidson says, these are tactical conversions. These kings are Muslims only in name, motivated as much the commercial convenience as by appreciation of the political and religious achievements and teaching of Islam. And so after this conversion, this later led to them falling to the Empire of Mali in the 13th century. There's too much history to go over to explain all this. I'm talking about 1700 years of history condensed into a 30-minute video. This is not meant to be comprehensive. Again, I do give more details in this video if you ever wanted to get more details. The link is in the description box. This is not a comprehensive history lesson, but it's just a reverse engineering of history that is meant to do one thing, and that's to explain who you are. If you are a descendant from the transatlantic slave trade, you are more than likely a descendant from the Songhai Empire. The Songhai Empire are descendants of the Za dynasty. The Za dynasty is an empire of Hebrews who were led by Hebrew kings that controlled Western Africa in the Sudan region for 10 centuries before being converted to Islam and conquered by the Empire of Mali. The descendants of the transatlantic slave trade are descendants of the Hebrew kingdom of the Za dynasty that descend from the house of Israel and the house of Judah from the line of Shem. This is who you are. If you are a descendant from the transatlantic slave trade, you are a descendant of the house of Israel and Judah. You are an Israelite. This is your history, and no one can take this from you now. Before I conclude this part, let me give you one more piece of history that can help confirm what I am saying to you. We're going to talk about Eldad the Danite, or also called Eldad Hadani. In the 9th century, this black African Hebrew arrived in the city of Karanan in Algeria. He told a credible story of a Hebrew empire south of the Sahara in the Western Sudan. According to Eldad, the Hebrews in the interior of Africa spoke a Phoenician Hebraic language mixed with Arabic. They had a religion which had come down from Moses. Eldad said that the people of his tribe had fled from the kingdom of Yasharel after Sennacherib the Assyrian had subdued it, and that other Israelite tribes such as Naphtali, Gad, and Asher were in the land from which he came. He told of the law of Moses, which they followed, the complete series of the scriptures except Esther and Lamentations. Eldad displayed as evidence some ceremony pertaining to the slaughtering of animals for food. It was written in Hebrew with an Arabic tint, but Eldad claimed that he knew no other language than Hebrew. In regard to Eldad's story, the Gaon, head of the Yahudim, assured the people that the story was credible. Solomon Grazel writes of Eldad in his book on page 279 in his book, History of the Jews. Understand, this is not hidden from record, it's just not known in the mainstream. His name is Eldad the Danite, or Eldad Hadani. Look him up, and then attach what else I have shared here. What I have tried to do in around 30 minutes is reverse engineer history from the transatlantic slave trade to the history of the people that those taken in the transatlantic slave trade descend from. You are not a black person. You are not a person without history. You have a great history and you have a great future. But this is only true if you live in the truth. So like I used with the analogy of Samson's hair, the enemy has made sure that you never regrow your hair, and he keeps you tied to him so that you are able to be easily controlled. But if you wake up and live in the truth and be who you're supposed to be, you will no longer be cursed, but you will be blessed. But oh yeah, here's the hardest thing to hear. You actually are cursed. You know, many of us, personally, we have had to deal with this. We have to think and understand, why do people hate us so much? Why were our people so oppressed? And why is it that no matter what we do, we cannot come together and achieve anything outside of what our oppressor has allowed? Why is this able to be? And the reason is that we are cursed, and that goes back into who you truly are. What I have done is gone deep into who we are. You are not a black person. You are a descendant from the house of Israel and Judah, and your heritage has been stripped from you, and is not just the fault of our oppressors, but more so the fault of our ancestors. So now that you know the truth of who you are, you need to understand what happened and why we were cursed. Why was this allowed to happen? Let me let you know that the reason I am able to make this video right now is because I am not cursed. I am in the blessing stage, and it is a great place to be, and I desire all to be there as well. But this cannot and will not happen without the acceptance of truth and living through it. but I don't want to go too fast. Let me help break this down for you so it can make sense. Psalm chapter 25 verse 5 prays to Yah and says, "Lead me in your truth and teach me, for you are the Elohim of my salvation. For you I wait all the day long." Psalm chapter 145 verse 18 says, "Yahuwah is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth." You see, the thing is that the devil has been indoctrinating people in so many lies that though they believe in Yah, they still reject him because they have parts of their heart that are unclean and impure. And because of this impurity, they cannot call on him in truth. I loved Yah before I knew this truth. I love him the same now that I know. But it's just that I understand him more. The world makes more sense, and I don't have to twist things or run from hard questions because I'm trying to fit these false philosophies of men in with my belief. I don't have to run away from the truths about Christianity because I'm trying to fit in with some label. I just live in his truths. It's the truth that truly sets us free. And who we are is a big part of this truth, especially in these end times. And most people will be judged because it is something that they cannot accept because of their thoughts and ideas about race and the hatred in their heart. You, please, do not let that be you. So we will stop the discussion at this time and pick it back up in the next episode where we get to understand why all of this was able to happen. Understand, right now, many of you watching are the dry bones, and it's time that you are awakened. And this series is trying to do just that. So now that you understand who you are a descendant from the house of Israel and Judah. Now that you understand this, please continue on to the next part and allow me to explain to you why our people have been cursed and why it was kept from you. I hope by now that you have made it this far in this series, it has at least got you thinking. Right now, many of you are the dry bones. And as Ezekiel 37 verse 11 says, you may believe your hope is lost and you yourselves are cut off. But I am here to show you the complete opposite is true. Your hope is not lost and you yourselves are not cut off if you just awaken and be who you truly are. So I will show you. Click on the link to the next video and let's talk about it some more. Be blessed. Hallelujah. Praise Yah.
We gotta praise God. Let's count our blessings. I'll teach you a lesson, and yeah, we gonna praise God. We gotta praise God. Let's count our blessings. I'll teach you a lesson, and yeah, we gonna praise God. We gotta praise God. Let's count our blessings. Let's count our lesson, and yeah, we gonna praise God.